We'll continue with project structure. So this is the project structure. We're gonna see nodes underscore modules public. Inside public is the void.svg, which is essentially the thumbnail, and the src, which are our root directory for most of our app components, app.css, assets, react.svg, app.jsx. This is where we will develop largely at the start. Main.jsx, this is the starting point of our app. Git ignore. So main.jsx, this is highly related to a single page web application because this is how we carve out those small HTML. This is the bundle that we will point to those carve out small HTML. ESLint, so this is like the grammar checker, index.html, git ignore, package.lock.json, package.json, readme, void config.js. So this is a breakdown of the most important folders and files. This file shows package.json. This file shows you a list of all third-party dependencies which are located in the node underscore modules folder, and other essential project configuration related to node or npm. So essentially this is where the dependencies of our application are stated. So this is being pushed to package.json. It's not the actual data, it's just like pointing or like a stock, a reference to the actual data. And also this is highly related to the npm we discussed, in which we create a module for other subscriber to be able to use. So this module, kind of think of this like a module that we discussed with ES modules with JavaScript in the design pattern chapter. So that's what being put here. Essentially, other developers' code can be used with your project. Now the file package-lock.json, this file indicates npm to break down all node packages version and their internal third-party dependencies. So this file, or this JSON file, will tell npm package manager how to resolve those node package dependencies that we have in this package.json and node underscore modules. Now, node underscore modules, this folder contains all node packages that have been installed. Since we use Vite to create our React application, there are various node volumes such as React already installed for us. So we'll not touch this folder as well. Git ignore, these files indicates all folders and files that shouldn't be added to your Git repository when using Git. As such, files and folders should be located only on your local machine. The node underscore module slash folder is one example. It is enough to share the package.json and package-lock.json files with other developers in the team, so they can install dependencies on their end with npm install without having to share the entire node underscore modules folder with everybody. So even in the same team, not just in pushing to GitHub, they also share the package.json, not the actual module. So vite.config.js, a file to configure Vite. If you open it, you should see Vite's React plugin showing up there. If you would be running Vite with another web framework, the other framework's Vite plugin would show up. In the end, there are many more things that can optionally be set up here. Public slash, this folder holds static assets for projects like a favicon, which is used for the browser's tab's thumbnail when starting the development server or building the project for production. So this is what you see as a thumbnail on your browser. Index.html, at the top of your browser. Index.html, the HTML that is displayed in the browser when when starting the project. If you open it, you shouldn't see much content though. However, you should see a script tag which links to your source folder where all React code is located to output HTML or CSS in the browser. So this is what I'm saying. The important part here is this. This is where the small HTML file has a script tag related to the bundle, which in our case is the app.jsx. So that's where we're gonna put most of the files here. In the beginning, everything you need is located in the src/folder. The main focus is on the src/app.jsx file where React components are implemented. This file will serve as the foundation for your application, but later on, you may want to split your React components into multiple files with each file managing one or more components. We'll get to that point eventually. So same with other languages, like I think it's with Node.js and JavaScript. I mean, I don't think it is actually what's happening. So with Node.js with JavaScript, they also separate their components via modules. So it's the same with this. So think about this individual.jsx file as individual modules where we separate scopes from our application code, with each file managing one or more components. So we'll get to that point eventually. Additionally, you'll find an src/main.jsx file which serves as an entry point to the React world. So that's what I'm saying. That's where it invoke those bundled React app into those HTML and then spawn all of those related JavaScript. So we will discuss that further. So you'll become more familiar with this file later in the section. There are also src/index.css and src/app.css. So this index.css, of course, those are the styling for the index.html, and then app.css is the styling for the app. So the reason why you only need like a small HTML file is because those .jsx file, such as the app.jsx, which is will be most of our React code, will be at the beginning, includes an HTML in itself. So that's what React does. Like it is a JavaScript inherently, but it calls a React, or sorry, it renders an HTML as well. So you don't need to render as much HTML as with the previous version of web development, which includes HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, both of which come with default styles when you open file them. You'll modify these later as well. Meet the React component. Every React component is built on the foundation of React components. In this section, you will be introduced to your first component, which is located in the src/app.jsx file. It should look familiar to the example below. Depending on your Vite version, the content of the file may differ slightly. So when we create that component, this is what actually shows up depending on the version of the Vite that you installed. So by default, you're gonna see this. So this is what a component looks like. Kind of think of this as a module in which you have this like scopes that your application are responsible for. So here, this is the boilerplate code. So this is the pattern. We have a function app. So this function app, this is important in React. So essentially, in a function app, we're introducing the function we discussed in JavaScript, where JavaScript is inherently functional programming. So this is the same here. We're gonna use a lot of function programming. At the same time, with the Node.js or with the server side, like TypeScript, we also use like a functional programming because it's inherently those Node.js and TypeScript are inherently JavaScript. So we're not gonna use as much as object-oriented programming here, which you probably have heard. So those object-oriented programming is kind of like not really, or think about this that as the old way of doing programming. It doesn't really model the real world now, or it doesn't model the real world as perfect as the functional programming. So here, but we still have those. We will still get the advantages of object-oriented programming using uh, class or yeah object-oriented programming in other in React. Sorry, in React and JavaScript, and moving forward with Node.js as well. So as you can see, this is a component. It's a function component. So there's different kinds of component in React, which we will discuss also in the next in the future video. So these files will be our focus throughout this book, unless otherwise specified. Even though this file will grow in size because we are not splitting it up from the beginning into multiple files, it will be simpler to understand as a beginner because everything is at one place. Once you get more comfortable with React, I will show you how to split your React project with your components into multiple files. So let's start by reducing the React component to a more lightweight version for getting you started without too much distracting boilerplate code. So here, we have a simple function app component that return a single div or container. So moving forward as well, this though you may think that it's just a simple like return or a function app, it actually consists of multiple underlying principles of HTML and JavaScript that you will discuss in the future videos. So optionally, I recommend making the src/index.css and src/app.css files blank for starting from a clean state style-wise. So the the index with index.css that style the index and app.css that style this app.jsx must be removed for now. So before we dive deeper into each topic, here comes a quick overview of what's in your code and what will be covered more in depth in the following sections. So first, in React component, specifically called app component, is just a JavaScript function. In contrast to traditional JavaScript functions, it's defined in Pascal case. So a JavaScript function is not defined in Pascal case. So the reason why is because it's kind of like acting like a class here, because in JavaScript in classes or in Pascal case, so a component has to start with a capital letter. Otherwise, it isn't treated as a component in React. So that's one of the syntaxes. The kind of the app component is commonly called a function component. So this kind of app component is a function component. Function component are the modern way of using components in React. However, be aware that there are other variations of React components. So we will discuss that in the future video, such as class component, hooks component, mixin component. So mixin component, we discussed that in design pattern. It's highly related, but it is just applied to how React does things. Second, additionally, as you will notice, like the mixin applied in React, and then the function applied in React, and then the module is also applied in React. So those things, it's the same concept with all of programming language, but they have different kind of implementation So they have like additional or you subtract functionality depending on programming language that you use. So those are also um, need to you also need to like realize that before learning this, because it allows you to like understand the subtleties of each languages. So second, the app component doesn't have any parameters in its function signature yet. So it hasn't it doesn't have parameter here in the inside of the parentheses. So a function signature is really the parameters inside this parentheses. So in the upcoming sections, you will learn how to pass information, see props in a later section, from one component to another component. So these props will be accessible via the function signature as parameters then. So later, we will discuss how props work. So props is just a properties. It's just an object in JavaScript. Now, I just want to like discuss the basics or remind ourselves about the basic of function. So function has parameters, right? It has a body and it has return statement. It has a function name as well. Function statement, which is the function, the keyword function, and the name, and then its parameter, whether it has parameter or not, and a body and a return statement and a closing as well. So that includes in the body. So it's the same principle with React. So with the props, it's kind of like complex to, think about that as a more complex thing. It's not just an object, so we will discuss that in the future. So, and third, the app component returns code that resembles HTML. You will see how this new syntax, CJSX, in a later section, allows you to combine JavaScript and HTML for displaying highly dynamic and interactive content in a browser. So this is not just representing JavaScript code, it also representing HTML. So this is the essence of React. It returns an HTML as well. Again, that's why we don't need that large HTML like before. So we will see this in JSX. And that will provide us a highly dynamic and interactive. And again, there's a lot of nuance on that. Think about it as a more complex topic that we will discuss further. So like any other JavaScript function, a function component can have implementation details between the function signature and the return statement. So again, any other like JavaScript function, a function component can have implementation details. So something that here before it returned, that's another component that I wasn't able to discuss. Aside from return statement, it also have implementation details that will be conditionally which will be the conditional of your return statement, meaning whatever you return here will depend on your implementation details if you have one. So variable defined in the function's body will be redefined each time this function runs. Which shouldn't be something new if you're familiar with JavaScript and its functions. So if you have a variable inside the body, therefore since it's a variable, it will be redefined in each instantiation of this component. So we will also discuss further details with regards to instantiation in this, but think about this just like with any other language. You instantiate an object, and that object basically contains memory on itself. And then, of course, each instantiation of that function will depend on the state or the locality on where that object are instantiated. Therefore, it will be redefined each time this function runs. So what it means by redefine is that you need to declare again, right? So instead of like having that, if you have this at the top, const title at the top, it will not be redefined in each instantiation of this module because it's already declared at the top. But if it's inside the function, every time that function ends or push into to the stock, uh, it will have to redefine itself. So it will be redefined within the function rather. So the function of a component runs every time a component is displayed in the browser. So this function of a component, since it's an object, it runs every time a component is displayed in the browser. So every time you have this function showed in the browser as an HTML, right, like a form, it will run every time it is displayed there. So this happens for the initial displaying of the component, but also whenever the component updates because it has to display something different due to the changes we're rendering. So this function will be called and pushed out of the stock, or it will run on the initial render once your application like initially load, the React app initially load, but at the same time when the state of that updated. So let's say like you type something on that component such as a search box. Since we do not want to redefine a variable within a function every time this function runs, we could define this variable outside of the component as well. In this case, the title does not depend on any information that's within the function component, like parameters coming from the function signature. Hence, it's okay to move it outside. So if your variable does not really depend on the function, so if the value of this variable does not really define on the function, it's okay to move it outside. Therefore, it will be defined only once and not every time the function is called. So think about this as something carving out from the memory. So this, for example, this will be put into the stock because it's a primitive data type. And then this function up, of course, this function up is in the stock because that's the reference inside the function. So this will be put into the heap. So since you don't really need this const title equals to React inside this function, because if you put this inside, it will become part of the heap. Therefore, every time this heap change, and heap is dynamic, therefore it is more resembles to the data that frequently change, and this is not really connected to it. Therefore, you're changing something every time despite it not being despite it not needing to change, right? Thus waste system resources or memory, CPU and memory resources. On your journey as a React developer and in this learning experience, you will come across both scenarios, variables, and functions defined outside within a component. As a rule of thumb, if a variable does not need anything from within the function component's body, like parameters, then define it outside of the component, which avoids redefining it on every function call. So another pattern that you would like to remember is that the parameters of a function. So if the variable does not depend on the parameters being inputted to a function that will be later transformed, right? Because function is lives in the heap. Therefore, you can put that outside. So that's one of the pattern, or shall we say, one of the tips or techniques. React JSX. So everything returned from a React component will be displayed in the browser. Until now, we only returned oh my god, HTML from the app component. However, recall that I mentioned the return output of the component not only resembles HTML, but it can also be mixed with JavaScript. In fact, this output is called JSX, which powerfully combines HTML and JavaScript. So again, this is the essence of React. So going back to our previous discussion with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So here, JavaScript is the logic, HTML is the structure, the CSS is still the styling. But the difference here is that you're rendering the logic and the structure at the same time, right? And then you're using declarative way to do it. Think about it like Squill, like we discussed in a database. Squill really like declare the commands, so that it's called declarative programming. So it doesn't really do imperative programming because it's complex. You have to define the how implementation instead of describing what you really want. So that's the main concept of JSX. So let's see how this works for displaying the variable from the previous section. Here. So here, in our function app, we return this component. So this component, what it is, we return a variable inside this along with this HTML. So the variable is title. So the title is have been defined early on. It's not inside the function anymore. Anytime one of our files changes, the development server notices it and reloads all affected files for the browser. So anytime we change this variable, the engine will check that what have been changed and then update what has been changed. So it will not update this whole thing or this whole module. It will only update what has been updated. So that's also the key thing with React, which we will discuss further in the future. The bridge between React and the development server, which makes this behavior possible, is called React Fast Refresh. Prior to that, it was React Hot Loader on React side and Hot Module replacement on the development server side. So so this is important. This hot module replacement, we're gonna see this again and again with the development side whenever you're developing front-end application, in which you're gonna see things immediately once you change something on your code. So that just mimics what actually React does under hood when it is compiled already. So when it is compiled already, that is called React Fast Refresh, or prior to that is a React Hot Loader. Next, try to define an HTML input field and an HTML label. Tag in your JSX yourself. It should be possible to focus the input field when clicking the label, either by nesting the input field in the label or by using dedicated HTML attributes for both. So if we define an input field or HTML input field and an HTML label, we're gonna see that immediately on our screen, because again, HTML is a DOM structure. So it basically under hood is still an HTML. We're calling a DOM API to show that on the browser. So in your JSX yourself, it should also be possible to focus the input when clicking the label by nesting the input field in the label or by using dedicated HTML attributes. So we can use any HTML because again, React are just rendering HTML and JavaScript. We will just continue with this in the next videos.